My name is Nora Caldwell, and I was 32 the year I learned that a family can look polished at church and still become dangerous in a room with paperwork. The papers on the closing table already had my grandmother's name on them before I ever walked into that office. The buyer had cash. The realtor had keys. My mother had a smile she used when she wanted strangers to trust her. My brother had 6 weeks before the bank took everything he had built. And in my bag sat a thick manila folder sealed in my grandmother's hand, with one sentence written across the top flap. When they come for the house, open this. I did not know then how many people had already lied. I did not know how long they had been planning it. I did not know that my grandmother had seen the whole thing coming long before the rest of us admitted she was slipping. I only knew that when I found her on her birthday, she was sitting alone at a kitchen table set for 8 with candles burned down to wax, and a cake no one had bothered to cut. Stay with me, because the worst part was not the empty birthday table. The worst part was what they tried to do after. And if this story reaches something tender in you, then like this video, subscribe, and tell me in the comments what one thing in your family home you would fight to protect. By the end you will understand why I asked. My grandmother's name was Lorraine Caldwell. She turned 79 on a cold Saturday in October. She baked her own cake that morning because she had baked every Caldwell birthday cake for more than 50 years, and because some habits stay in the hands long after memory starts to loosen everywhere else. Vanilla sponge. Buttercream roses. Pink gel letters on the top. 79. She set the table for 8. Not 6. Not 4. 8. Paper napkins folded under good forks. The heavy white plates with the blue rim she only used on holidays. A glass bowl of dried hydrangeas from her garden in the middle. She must have stood there and counted each place setting while she still believed we were all coming. My father. My mother. My brother. Me. Maybe a cousin or two. Maybe she expected noise. Maybe she expected what family is supposed to be. What she got was silence. My parents were in Aspen on a ski trip they had somehow turned into a spiritual retreat on social media. My mother posted a photo in ski goggles with the word blessed under it. My father posted nothing at all. My brother sent a text at 4:15 that said happy birthday Gran. Skiing is amazing. That was the whole message. No call. No apology. No promise to make it up to her. I was in Hartford at work when I remembered the date, and saw the family thread sitting there like a crime scene. I left as soon as my shift ended. 3 hours on the road with a gas station bouquet on the passenger seat, and my stomach in knots for reasons I could not fully name yet. I pulled into her gravel driveway at 8:12. The porch light was on. Every other window was dark. Inside the kitchen the birthday had already died. The cake sat in the middle of the table with the candles burned so low they had collapsed into the frosting. A carton of Neapolitan ice cream had softened into a puddle on the tablecloth. The hydrangeas looked brittle and tired under the overhead light. And at the head of the table sat Lorraine in her lavender cardigan with both hands around a glass of water, as if she had been waiting for someone to tell her what came next. She looked up when I came in. Nora. Then she frowned the way people do when the world shifts under them by 1 inch. Is it Tuesday? It was Saturday. Her birthday. I set the flowers in a mason jar because I did not know what else to do first. Then I cut her a slice of cake. I sat beside her. We ate with our hands because neither of us felt like washing forks. I sang to her once, and halfway through she asked me to start over because she had forgotten why I was singing. So I started over. There are sounds you never forget. Her voice when she thanked me for coming is one of them. It was soft and embarrassed and relieved all at once. Like she had been trying not to need anyone, and had finally lost that fight. I got her to bed a little after 10. She weighed almost nothing when I helped her down the hall. Her wrist felt as thin as the cardboard tube inside a paper towel roll. When I pulled the quilt up to her chin, she caught my hand. Her eyes sharpened for one clear second. Not confused. Not drifting. Sharp. They think I do not notice. I waited for more. She was asleep before she gave it. That was the first warning. I should tell you who we were before everything split open. The Caldwells of Briarwood were what people in Connecticut call comfortable. My father Gregory had spent most of his career at an insurance brokerage until he reached the age where men rename leisure as consulting, and nobody questions it if they still wear a collared shirt. My mother Diane organized charity galas and sat on the library board and knew exactly how to lower her voice when she wanted a room to believe she was the reasonable one. My brother Aaron ran a small construction development firm and drove a German sedan that looked expensive even when it was parked. Then there was me. The paperwork one. That was what my family called me because I worked as a paralegal in a 4-person elder law office in Hartford. Wills. Trusts. Guardianship petitions. Power of attorney disputes. The dry side of family love. The side that only matters once money and illness enter the room together. I made $47,000 a year. I studied for the bar at night. My mother liked to tilt her head at dinner and say Nora still does her little legal assistant thing in the same tone some people use for hobbies. I stopped correcting her years earlier. But Lorraine never talked about my work that way. To her it mattered that I read every line. It mattered that I noticed dates and signatures and odd wording and the difference between what people promise and what paper actually says. She was the one who taught me that. When I was 19, and trying to sign my first lease, she sat with me on the back porch with her reading glasses low on her nose, and a red pen in her hand, and showed me how to circle late fee clauses and maintenance language and auto-renewal traps. She co-signed my first apartment after my parents refused because they said struggling a little would build character. This house was where I learned that care is not always loud. I took my first steps on the kitchen floor. I learned fractions at the maple table by sorting pecans for pie. I learned how to hold grief quietly when my first real heartbreak sent me to her back porch at midnight with puffy eyes and no plan. Lorraine made tea and asked no questions until I was ready to answer them. She did not perform love. She practiced it. I slept in the guest room that night and lay awake staring at the ceiling crack I had traced since I was 6 years old. Sometime after midnight I got up for water and passed the hallway shelf where she kept framed family photos and church bulletins and the odd receipts she meant to file later. A business card stuck out from behind a silver frame. Brenda Voss. Voss and Dean Realty. There was handwriting on the back in blue ink. Comp value $680,000. Quick close possible. I put the card back where I found it. My hands stayed steady. My stomach did not. Sunday morning I cleaned because when I am afraid I scrub surfaces. Lorraine slept in the recliner with a crossword sliding off her lap, while I wrapped leftover cake, and washed buttercream off the good plates, and threw away candles that had melted into helpless little towers. Every time I looked at the table a thought kept trying to land, and I kept shoving it away. This house was being prepared for something. At 10:15 someone knocked. 2 strangers stood on the porch. The woman was around 60 with a silver bob, and a wool coat, and the kind of posture that comes from decades of telling bad news without turning dramatic. The man beside her was younger and carried a notary seal, in a zippered case. The woman asked if I was Nora Caldwell. I said yes. She introduced herself as Ruth Adler. Her colleague was Nathan Pute. She said my grandmother had retained her firm 14 months earlier, and asked that a sealed folder be delivered to me personally when the time came. Then she handed it to me. It was a thick manila folder with Lorraine Caldwell written on the tab in careful blue ink. The flap had been sealed and signed across in my grandmother's hand. Not shaky. Not broken. Strong. Deliberate. The kind of signature a woman writes when she knows exactly what she is doing. I asked Ruth what the time came meant. She glanced through the screen door at Lorraine sleeping in the recliner. Then she handed me a card and said to come to her office when I was ready, and not to discuss the folder with my parents before I spoke to her. That was all. They were back in their car before I could ask anything else. I stood on the porch with the folder in both hands and felt something old and cold move through me. Fear maybe. Or recognition. The kind that arrives before understanding does. My phone buzzed. A text from my mother. Who is at the door? Do not sign anything. That was the second warning. I brought the folder inside and sat at the kitchen table where the birthday cake had been. For a long moment I only stared at the seal. Then I broke it. Inside was a stack of documents I knew on sight. A deed. A trust instrument. A durable power of attorney. Witness pages. Notary pages. A physician letter on medical letterhead dated 14 months earlier. Clipped to the front was a handwritten note on cream stationery in Lorraine hand. Nora. When they come for the house, open this. Everything you need is here. I love you. I am sorry. It has to be you. I read the note 3 times. Each time the same phrase hit harder. When they come for the house. Not if. When. She had known. 14 months earlier she had known somebody in this family would try to take the house once her mind was no longer strong enough to stop them in person. She had seen the shape of the betrayal before the rest of us even admitted she was changing. She had not just feared it. She had prepared for it. I closed the folder and pressed both palms flat on top of it. Through the doorway I could hear her snoring softly in the recliner. I did not sleep that night. The folder sat on the nightstand, and I watched the dark shift across the ceiling, while the house made its old familiar noises around me. Pipes settling. Heat kicking on. Wind against the hydrangeas. The kind of sounds that belong to a place that has held people for decades. Sometime near dawn I stopped asking myself whether my family was planning to sell the house. I started asking how far they had already gotten. Monday morning answered that question. I found the lockbox while taking out the recycling. It was clamped to the gas meter behind the hydrangea bushes where it could not be seen from the road unless you already knew where to look. A realtor lockbox. Heavy. Official. Real. My breath went shallow the second I saw it. Somebody had been showing the house. Not talking about it. Not considering it. Showing it. I went back inside and opened the pile of unsorted mail on the hallway table. 3 weeks of envelopes sat there between church newsletters and pharmacy flyers. Buried in the middle was a printed listing sheet on Voss and Dean letterhead. Off market. 4 bedrooms. 2.5 baths. Original hardwood. Quarter-acre lot. List price $680,000. $50,000 under the most recent comparable sale in the neighborhood. In the kitchen junk drawer I found the rest. A purchase agreement. And signed. Filled out. Ready. Buyer was Stonewall Capital Group LLC. Cash offer. 30-day close. Seller line blank, but under it someone had penciled L. Caldwell in block letters, as if practicing where a failing hand should land. Seller representative listed as Aaron Caldwell. My brother. I sat down on the kitchen floor with papers spread around me like debris after a storm. The business card. The lockbox. The listing sheet. The purchase agreement. A sticky note in my mother handwriting that said closing target November 15th. 3 weeks away. I thought that was the whole story. I was wrong. That night I called my mother. She answered on the second ring with the bright church volunteer voice she used when she wanted to sound gracious while controlling the room. She asked how Lorraine was doing and said Aspen had been divine. I told her there was a lockbox on the gas meter. Silence. Not long. Just long enough. Then she said the matter was being handled, and that my father and brother had been working with a lovely agent on a transition plan, because Lorraine could no longer manage the house on her own. I said there was a purchase agreement in the kitchen drawer. Her voice changed. Just one register down. Colder. Less performance. More ownership. She said this was a family decision between her and my father and my brother. She said they had been managing Lorraine affairs for months, and I did not need to worry about the details. I asked if Lorraine knew the house was being sold. My mother said Lorraine knew what she needed to know. Then she gave me the real answer. The one she believed made everything acceptable. Aaron Company was in a difficult stretch. The house could fund proper care for Lorraine, and help Aaron through a rough patch. It was the responsible thing to do. I said it was Lorraine House. My mother said Lorraine had dementia, and should not be making decisions about a $680,000 asset. Then she said the sentence I still hear in my head, when I think about what greed sounds like in a calm voice. She said Lorraine would not remember the house by Christmas. The line hummed between us. I said it was a good thing I remembered. Then I hung up. The next morning I drove to Hartford and met Ruth Adler. Her office sat on the second floor of a converted brownstone with faded rugs and framed law diplomas, and a brass sign that said elder law and estate planning. The waiting room smelled faintly of tea and old paper. Ruth led me into a conference room, and set a pot of Earl Grey and a box of tissues exactly in the center of the table without saying why. That small act told me she had done this work for a very long time. She knew where family stories usually go once incapacity enters the room. She began with the first meeting. 14 months earlier Lorraine had come to her office alone. Pressed slacks. Pearl earrings. A folder under her arm with the deed to the house, and tax records, and an old will from 1998. She already knew she was slipping. She had gotten lost driving home from the post office. A neighbor found her 2 towns over and brought her back. She called Ruth the next morning. Ruth said Lorraine was sharp that day. Frightened but sharp. She knew her assets. She knew her family. She knew exactly what she was afraid of. I asked what she was afraid of. Ruth folded her hands and told me Lorraine said her son would do whatever Diane wanted and Diane would sell the house the minute Lorraine could not stop her herself. Hearing it out loud made my chest go tight. Not because I doubted it. Because Lorraine had not doubted it either. Ruth said Lorraine did not come in to ask vague questions. She came in with decisions already forming. She wanted 2 things. She wanted to protect the house, and she wanted to choose the person who would protect her when she no longer could. That person was not my father. It was me. Ruth let that sit before she opened the file. This is where the middle of the story changed for me. Because until then I still thought I was discovering a betrayal. What Ruth showed me was that my grandmother had already mapped the betrayal out and built a wall against it piece by piece while she still had time. First came the trust. On August 9th of the previous year Lorraine executed a revocable living trust. The house was transferred into it by deed 3 days later, and recorded with the town clerk. Not discussed. Not promised. Recorded. Public record. That meant the property no longer belonged to Lorraine as an individual. It belonged to the trust. Second came the successor trustee provision. While Lorraine had capacity, she remained in control. If she became incapacitated, the successor trustee would take over administration of trust assets. I was the successor trustee. Not Gregory. Not Aaron. Me. Third came the durable power of attorney. On the same day Lorraine named me as her agent for financial and health matters. Durable meant it survived incapacity. It did not disappear when she got sick. It became more important. Fourth came the physician letter. Dr. Helen Mercer. Neurologist. Same date. Clear language. Lorraine demonstrated full understanding of the nature and consequences of the legal instruments she was signing. She understood her assets. She understood the effect of the trust. She understood she was choosing me. Ruth tapped the letter and said this was the foundation. Then she told me the part that made the room feel colder. If my family had gotten Lorraine to sign anything later during decline, then those later documents might not be valid at all. And even if they were later, powers of attorney do not override a properly funded trust. They do not reach into assets that have already been transferred. In other words, the house was not theirs to sell. It had never been theirs to sell. I remember staring at the deed copy on the table and feeling two things at once. Relief because Lorraine had protected herself. Horror because that meant my family had either never checked the public record before trying to sell her home, or they had checked and planned to bulldoze ahead anyway. Either possibility was ugly. I drove back to Briarwood in a fog and let myself into the house with the spare key Lorraine had given me when I was 16. She was in her recliner by the window. Television murmuring. Hands folded. For one breathless second when she looked up at me, her eyes were perfectly clear. "You went to see Ruth?" I stopped in the doorway. "You remember Ruth?" She said she remembered enough. Then she told me they had been bringing people through the house on Tuesdays when the nurse was there. She said she would hear doors opening and closing and footsteps in the kitchen and strangers looking around while people spoke about her home, as if she had already died. She said my father would not look at her when he came by. Then she said Aaron had brought papers and she did not remember what she had signed. That sentence landed harder than anything Ruth had shown me. Because now the betrayal had a shape I could see. Not just phone calls. Not just plans. They had put paper in front of a confused old woman inside her own kitchen, and guided her hand while she trusted them because they were family. I took her hand and told her it did not matter what she had signed because she had already taken care of it. She squeezed my fingers with surprising strength. "I am not gone yet." That was the third warning. Aaron came the next day. He never knocked. He just walked into the house with car keys jingling, and a smile ready like rooms were supposed to be grateful for him. He kissed the top of my head. He smelled like cedar cologne and expensive leather. He opened Lorraine's fridge and took a sparkling water like he had every right. I told him I knew about the listing. For one beat the smile stalled. Then he shifted into negotiation. He said his company was in a rough patch. A balloon payment was due in 8 weeks. $740,000. If he missed it, the bank would tear through everything. Projects. Contracts. Equity. Reputation. Years gone. He said selling the house solved everything. Lorraine could go to a facility. My parents could stop worrying. He could keep his business alive. Everybody would win. I said everybody except Lorraine. He said Lorraine did not know what day it was. I said Lorraine knew strangers were walking through her kitchen. His jaw hardened. He stepped closer and told me not to make this difficult because family helps family. I asked if that was what he told Lorraine when he brought her papers to sign. That was the moment the warmth left his face completely. Then he said the one thing I think he believed would end the conversation. He said the house was basically sold already. After he left, I searched the house harder than before. At the bottom of the hallway credenza behind a stack of old magazines, I found the September documents. A new power of attorney dated September 3rd. Gregory Caldwell named as Lorraine agent for financial and property decisions. Stapled to it was a listing authorization dated the same day that gave Aaron authority to act as seller representative. I laid those papers beside the originals from Ruth folder on the kitchen table. That was when the signatures told their own story. The August signature on the trust documents was strong and connected and sure. The capital L had its long tail. The loops held. The pen pressure stayed even. The September signature trembled. The letters broke apart. The pen lifted where it never used to. It looked less like writing and more like compliance. I pulled up the date on my phone. September 3rd was the same week Lorraine had fallen and gone to the emergency room. I found the discharge summary in the mail pile a few minutes later. Patient disoriented. Intermittent confusion. Recommend neurological follow-up. They had her sign new legal documents in the same week a hospital documented confusion. I sat there at the table with both versions of her name in front of me and felt something turn from suspicion into certainty. This was not a family disagreement. This was exploitation. Ruth came to the house on Friday. Not her office. The house. She said it mattered that we lay everything out where the harm had happened. So we sat at Lorraine maple kitchen table with old scratches and coffee rings, and laid the 5 most important documents in a row like evidence. The recorded trust deed. The original durable power of attorney naming me. The capacity letter from Dr. Mercer. The September power of attorney naming Gregory. The listing agreement with Aaron and Brenda Voss attached to a below-market sale. Ruth went through each document slowly. She showed me the recording stamp on the deed. Public record. Not ambiguous. She showed me the trust language that gave authority to the trustee, and then to the successor trustee on incapacity. She explained that even a valid later power of attorney would not control trust property because the property no longer belonged to Lorraine personally. She showed me what the September papers did not have. No capacity evaluation. No independent medical confirmation. No witness structure matching the strength of the original file. Then she said the sentence I had needed to hear out loud. The sale cannot close. I should have felt peace. Instead I felt dread. Because once people decide an old woman home is rescue money for a younger man, bad decisions do not become smaller when they are exposed. They get desperate. And desperate people do ugly things fast. Ruth agreed. We had 2 paths. One was public and slow. Emergency probate filing. Injunction. Hearings. Lawyers. The other was quiet and surgical. Wait for the closing. Walk in with the recorded deed and the medical evidence. Put everything in front of the title officer. Let the title company refuse to insure bad paper. No courtroom. No shouting. Just documents. Let the paper speak. Lorraine note came back to me then. When they come for the house, open this. Not take this to court. Not beg them. Not convince them. Open this. She had trusted documents more than people. I understood why. We chose the closing table. That was when the story should have started moving toward resolution. Instead it got darker. The first problem was medical records. Ruth told me we needed a current capacity evaluation from Dr. Mercer. Not because the August letter was weak. It was not. But because a recent evaluation would shut down any claim that Lorraine now agreed to this sale, or that the September papers reflected a valid preference. I called the clinic Monday morning. The receptionist put me on hold long enough for my coffee to go cold. When she came back, her voice had that careful practice tone used by people reading from policies while trying not to sound complicit. She said a request had been made 6 weeks earlier to restrict access to Lorraine records and evaluation results to a designated family contact only. I asked who the designated family contact was. Gregory Caldwell. My father. For a second I could not speak. They had not only gotten Lorraine to sign new documents during confusion. They had locked down her medical records right after. They had built a wall around the very information that could expose what they had done. I sat in my car outside the clinic with my forehead against the steering wheel and saw the architecture of the plan for the first time. It was not impulsive. It was layered. Signatures. Access control. Realtor. buyer, timeline, pressure. Everything arranged so that by the time anyone objected the house would already be gone. I called Ruth from the parking lot. She was not surprised. She said we would file a health records authorization under the original durable power of attorney because mine predated theirs and named me as health agent. She said the clinic was legally required to honor it. 2 days later we had the records. The system works slowly. That is the curse. But when it works it leaves a trail. Dr. Mercer agreed to perform a current evaluation. Lorraine now lacked capacity. The decline was real. Clear. Well documented. That meant the window for meaningful consent had closed long before my family started pushing paper across her table in September. I wish I could tell you my mother backed down when the facts got stronger. She did not. She came to the house on Thursday evening wearing church pearls and a cashmere scarf from Aspen and carrying a brochure for Maple Glen Assisted Living like she was bringing a casserole. She spread it on the kitchen table. Private rooms. Garden view. Activities. Safe environment. She talked in that calm tone people use when they are presenting something civilized and already decided. She said they could transition Lorraine before Thanksgiving and have the house staged by December 1st. I told her the buyer was already lined up. For a blink something in her face cracked. Then she said I was emotional because I was attached to the house and did not understand the financial reality of the family. That was the moment I realized she really believed Aaron debt and Lorraine lifetime home belonged in the same column. She said the papers were already with the title company. She said the closing was November 15th. She said this is happening, Nora. Then she left the brochure behind like a threat with photos. That night I almost walked away. I am not proud of that sentence, but it is true. There is a point in every fight where fatigue whispers a life raft into your ear. Walk away. Let the older people handle their own family. Let the loud ones win. Protect your peace. Save yourself. But if you have ever seen an older person treated like a problem to be transferred instead of a life to be honored, then you know what happened next. I stayed. And the clock started. 9 days to closing. Day 1 I filed a report with Adult Protective Services from my car outside the municipal building. The intake worker was patient and unsurprised in a way that broke my heart more than outrage would have. She had heard versions of this before. Different families. Same structure. Confused elder. Convenient paperwork. Urgent sale. Younger relative in financial trouble. She gave me a case number and said they would flag it as time sensitive because a closing date was already set. When I got home, I had a voicemail from Ruth. An anonymous complaint about Lorraine's situation had been filed 6 weeks earlier. No name. No follow-up. But the file existed. That meant someone else had seen what was happening and been frightened enough to hide, but not quiet enough to do nothing. I did not know who it was. Not yet. The idea of an invisible witness should have comforted me. Instead it made the house feel full of shadows. Who had seen enough to call? And what exactly had they seen? Day 4 my father came alone. He parked in the old Buick he used for errands instead of the car he drove to church. He sat in the driveway for a full minute before getting out. Through the window he looked smaller than I remembered. Not innocent. Not noble. Just worn thin by a life spent choosing the easier silence. He came through the back door and stood in the kitchen looking around as if the cabinets might explain what he should say. Then he sat at the table and put both hands flat on the wood. He said his mother used to sing Patsy Cline in this kitchen every Sunday morning. I said I remembered. He told me he knew what I thought of him. I waited. Then it came out in pieces. Aaron was in over his head. Diane said the house was the only way. Lorraine would have wanted Aaron saved. Lorraine would not have wanted the family destroyed. The word family sounded strange in his mouth, because he was using it to describe a transfer of value. Not love. Not duty. Value. I told him he could still stop it. For 1 second he looked at me, and I saw the child he must once have been in this house. The boy who had been fed at that table and tucked into bed under this roof by the same woman he was now helping erase from her own property. Then his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen. Diane. He stood up and said he should go. He did not say goodbye to his mother in the next room. After he left, I washed the coffee cup he had used and put it away because even in fury this house trained me to clean up after sadness. Day 5 I bought another cake. Not fancy. Just a 6-inch vanilla cake with buttercream from the bakery on Elm Street, and 1 candle because 79 flames felt cruel in a house full of dry paper and old grief. I set the table for 2 at 3 in the afternoon, and called Lorraine into the kitchen. She saw the cake and stopped in the doorway. She asked whose birthday it was. I told her it was hers, and we were doing it over. She sat down slowly. I lit the candle. She stared at the little flame with such focus it hurt to watch. Like she was trying to press the whole moment into whatever part of herself was still reachable. I told her to make a wish. She closed her eyes and blew it out on the first try. Then I asked what she wished for. She looked at me with those sudden clear eyes that came like small miracles between long hours of fog. She said she wished I would stay. I nearly broke right there at the table. We ate cake with forks this time. She told me she planted the hydrangeas in 1987. She told me the kitchen table had come from her mother's house in Bridgeport, and arrived in the back of a pickup in 1974. She said every scratch on it was a Thanksgiving she had won. Then she leaned toward me and said quietly that I should not let them take the table. I told her I would not. That promise became larger than furniture. Day 6 the phone calls began. Aunt Caroline first. Then a parish council friend of my mother. Then Aaron business partner. Then a woman from the garden club, who had known Lorraine 40 years. Each conversation carried the same accusation in slightly different wrapping. I was overstepping. I was emotional. I was trying to take control. I did not understand the larger situation. The family was under strain. My mother had done what she always did well. She had reached the room before the truth did. I did not argue. Ruth had told me the documents would speak. I did not need to audition my moral clarity for people who only knew the version Diane had handed them. But that night my phone rang one more time. Aunt June. Lorraine younger sister. 81. Still sharp enough to cut paper with her voice. She said she did not believe a word Diane was saying, and wanted me to know why. Last August Lorraine had called her and said she had gone to a lawyer. She had said she was putting the house in order while she still could. She had said if anything happened June was to back Nora up. I sat on the guest room bed after that call and cried for the first time since the folder arrived. Not because I was scared. Because for 1 minute, I did not feel alone. 3 days until closing. Day 7 Ruth called with information about the title company. Capital Title Services. Conference Room B, escrow officer named Linda Yates. 22 years in the business. By the book. Ruth had an off-the-record contact who told her Linda had already flagged the file weeks earlier because preliminary title showed the house held in trust. Brenda Voss had apparently sent an affidavit claiming the trust had been dissolved, and the property reconveyed to Lorraine individually. No recorded reconveyance deed existed. Brenda had papered over the problem with a statement, and hoped no one checked too hard. The deal was standing on cracked ice. That mattered because it told me something about the room we were walking into. We would not be dropping truth into blank space. We would be forcing it through a hairline fracture that was already there. Day 8 I reviewed the documents again and again at the kitchen table. Trust deed. Original power of attorney. Capacity letter. Current evaluation. September power of attorney. Listing agreement. Purchase contract. Hospital discharge summary. My notes. Ruth notes. A clean timeline. A hard trail. Every piece pointed the same way. I practiced what I would say. Not speeches. Not accusations. Facts. The property was held in trust. The trustee was not the seller at this table. The September document was executed during documented cognitive confusion. The title could not be insured. I said the sentences out loud until my voice stopped shaking. That evening I ironed the same blouse and set out the same work flats I had worn the night I drove 3 hours to cut my grandmother's birthday cake, because nobody else bothered. The symmetry of it made me feel sick. The night before the closing I sat with Lorraine in the living room, while she worked a crossword with a ballpoint pen, because she said pencils were for people who did not trust themselves. I told her tomorrow was going to be a big day. She hummed without looking up. Then she read a clue aloud. Legal instrument of protection. 5 letters. I smiled and told her the answer was trust. She wrote it in. A few minutes later she reached into her cardigan pocket and handed me a folded piece of paper. On it in shaky but readable handwriting were the words for Nora, the keeper of the table. Underneath was her signature. Not the strong one from the August documents. Not the broken one from September. Something in between. A woman fading and fighting at the same time. Then she looked at me and said again that she was not gone yet. I put the note in my wallet beside my license. In the morning the note and the folder and I went to the closing together. Capital Title Services sat in a 1-story brick building on Main Street with tinted windows and a polished brass handle that reflected the sky back at us. I parked across the street at 1:45. Ruth arrived at 1:50 with Nathan. She carried a briefcase. I carried the manila folder. Conference room B was small. 10 chairs. Oval table. Water pitcher. Printer in the corner. Linda Yates stood at the head of the table arranging document stacks with the neatness of someone who believed order could protect people from chaos if she aligned enough edges. She looked up when we entered. Ruth introduced herself as counsel for the Lorraine E. Caldwell Revocable Living Trust and said we had documents relevant to the transaction. Linda Penn stopped moving. Before she could respond, the door opened again. My mother came in first. Cashmere blazer. Pearls. Perfect social smile. Aaron behind her in a tailored sport coat with a leather portfolio and the expression of a man trying to look ahead of a problem he already feels beneath his feet. My father last among them with his face gray and empty. Then Brenda Voss in kitten heels and bright highlights holding closing packets like she was bringing a party favor. Then Daniel Fazy from Stonewall Capital in a navy suit with the detached look of a man who buys houses the way some people buy batteries. My mother saw me and stopped. Her smile stayed in place half a second too long. She asked what I was doing there. I told her I was taking a seat. Then I sat down. Ruth sat beside me. I placed the folder in front of me and folded my hands on top of it. The room went quiet in a way that felt louder than shouting. Linda looked at Ruth and asked to see the documents. Ruth opened her briefcase and laid them out one at a time in the center of the table with exact calm. First came the certified copy of the recorded trust deed. She stated the recording date. She stated the property address. She stated that title to the house had been transferred into the trust the previous year. I watched my mother face in that moment. Not collapse. Not yet. Change. The first crack. Second came the original durable power of attorney naming me. Aaron leaned forward before Ruth finished explaining it. He said they had a more recent power of attorney that superseded mine. Third came the August capacity letter, and then the current evaluation. Ruth explained them in the same measured voice. Lorraine had full capacity when she executed the trust plan. Lorraine lacked capacity now. Any later documents executed after decline and confusion were open to challenge and in this case deeply compromised by the medical record. Then Ruth said the sentence that turned the air electric. Even if the September power of attorney were somehow valid, it would not authorize sale of trust property because the house was not Lorraine's individual asset anymore. Linda picked up the trust deed. She read it carefully. She checked the recording information against the file in front of her. She pulled her preliminary title work closer. Then she looked at Brenda Voss and asked when the trust had supposedly been dissolved. Brenda went pale. She said she had been told it was handled. Ruth responded that no reconveyance deed had ever been recorded because no dissolution had ever occurred. Linda read a little longer. Every second stretched. Aaron started talking faster. He said this was a misunderstanding. He said Lorraine was family. He said Gregory was her son. He said there was a signed power of attorney in their packet. He said the sale was already approved. He said the buyer was ready. He said the family needed this. No one answered him right away. And that silence was the moment I knew the deal was dead. Because rooms like that do not go silent when everything is fine. They go silent when professionals realize they have been handed bad paper, and nobody wants to be the first person to say it out loud. Finally Linda set the trust deed down. She squared the edges with the rest of the file and said 5 words. I cannot close this transaction. That was it. Not a speech. Not a verdict. Not thunder. 5 ordinary words that broke everything my family had built around this sale. Daniel from Stonewall closed his portfolio at once. He did not argue. Men who deal in distressed properties know the difference between risk and rot. He stood. Brenda kept staring at the table like maybe if she did not move the facts would rearrange themselves. My father looked at the trust deed as if it were a letter from the dead. Then my mother exploded. Not immediately. First came disbelief dressed as offense. She said this was ridiculous. She said I was only a paralegal. She said my father was Lorraine's only child and had authority. She said the room was overreacting. Ruth never raised her voice. She simply repeated the structure. Trust property. Recorded deed. No reconveyance. September execution during documented confusion. No insurable title. The word title did what moral language had not. It took the argument out of the realm of family feeling and placed it in the realm of liability. Linda did not care who loved whom, or who had birthdays, or who posted ski photos. She cared whether she could ensure clean transfer. She could not. Aaron stood so fast his chair scraped the floor hard enough to make everyone flinch. He said he had a $740,000 payment due in 6 weeks. He said if the deal fell through the bank would take everything. There was real panic in his voice now. No polish left. No charm. Just fear. Linda told him his financial obligations were not the concern of the title office. He turned to me then. Sometimes people show you their true age in one expression. In that second Aaron did not look like my older brother. He looked like a boy whose rescue had just been denied. Furious. Cornered. Ready to blame the nearest person who refused to save him. He said I was going to destroy the family. I had practiced my response in the kitchen the night before. Steady. Conversational. No extra volume. I told him he tried to sell a 79-year-old woman home, while she sat alone on her birthday with an untouched cake. I told him he put papers in front of her during a hospital week marked by confusion. I told him he lied to the title company about a dissolved trust. Then I asked how exactly I was the one destroying anything. He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. My mother started crying then. Loud. Immediate. A full public grief performance about everything she had done for the family, and how ungrateful I was, and how none of us understood pressure. My father still said nothing. Not one word. He sat with both hands in his lap and looked 20 years older than he had when he walked in. Ruth spoke into the mess with absolute calm, and said an Adult Protective Services investigation was active regarding the possible financial exploitation of Lorraine Caldwell. She said the September power of attorney would be formally challenged and any further effort to sell or encumber trust property without authorization would become a legal matter very quickly. That stopped the crying. My mother looked at Ruth and then at me with wet cheeks, and a face turning hard underneath the tears. She said I would regret this when Aaron lost his company, and when my father had nowhere to turn, and when the family fell apart. I stood up. I put the manila folder back in my bag. Then I looked at her and said the truest thing I knew. You do not get to decide what she is worth. Not the house. Her. Then I thanked Linda for her professionalism and walked out. The November air outside felt cleaner than any air I had breathed in 9 days. Ruth touched my elbow and told me I had done well. I told her I had done what Lorraine asked me to do. Ruth said that was what she meant. On the drive back to Oakwood Lane, the folder sat on the passenger seat exactly where the gas station bouquet had set the night I drove in for the forgotten birthday. The road looked the same. Trees. Stone walls. Backyards thinning into dusk. But something had shifted inside me. The counting was over. When I got home, the porch light was on. The house was still there. Lorraine was asleep in her recliner with the crossword on her lap, and her reading glasses tilted sideways. I knelt beside her and tucked the quilt around her shoulders. I told her it was done, and the house was safe. Her hand found mine before her eyes opened. Then for one brief shining second the fog parted. She asked if I had kept the table. I laughed for real for the first time in days. I told her yes. She smiled. Small and certain. Good girl. Then she went back to sleep. I sat on the floor beside her chair, and looked through the doorway at the maple table in the kitchen. Scratched. Coffee stained. Still standing where it had stood since 1974. The folder was in my bag. The new note was in my wallet. The house was in the trust. And for the first time since the strangers came to the door, I was not bracing for the next impact. But endings in families do not happen all at once. They erode. Aaron missed the balloon payment 8 weeks later, right on schedule. The bank moved on his projects. 3 half-finished townhomes in Glastonbury. A commercial lot in Weathersfield. Aaron Caldwell Properties filed Chapter 7 in January. He sold the German sedan. Last I heard he was working as a project manager for another firm, and making a fraction of what he used to. He never called to apologize. My mother standing in Briarwood did not collapse in one dramatic moment. Reputations in small towns go soft around the edges first. Then they split. Aunt June talked. People at church talked. The closing file existed. The library board grew quiet around her. The church group that once loved her cheerful updates suddenly had less to say. By spring she and my father had moved to a condo in West Hartford. My father sent one email in March. 3 sentences. He said he should have done more. He said he knew that now. He said he was sorry. I read it twice and did not answer. Some apologies arrive too late to become repair. They only become evidence that the person finally understands what they failed to be when it mattered. Adult Protective Services substantiated the complaint. Through 2 probate hearings, my family did not contest the September power of attorney. It was formally voided. The court confirmed my role as permanent trustee, and appointed me as Lorraine legal guardian. I deferred the bar exam. I took leave from my firm. I moved into the guest room at Oakwood Lane full-time. The one with the old ceiling crack I had traced since childhood. I became the person who made sure Lorraine ate dinner and took medication, and wore a sweater when the evening cooled, and got sunlight on the porch when the hydrangeas still held color. It was not the life I had planned. It was the life love asked for. And here is the part that hurts most when I remember it. There were days Lorraine did not know my name. There were afternoons she would ask whether her mother was coming by later. There were evenings when she looked around the kitchen with a stranger wonder and asked if she had always lived in such a nice place. But there were also moments. A hand squeeze. A burst of recognition. A sentence from nowhere that landed with all the weight of the woman she had been. On a Tuesday in April I baked a cake. Vanilla. Buttercream. Nothing fancy. I set it on the kitchen table in the afternoon light, and called her in from the living room. She came with her crossword in one hand, and looked at the cake, and asked whose birthday it was. I told her it was Tuesday, and Tuesday was enough. She sat. She took a bite. Then she closed her eyes and said it was her recipe. I told her it was. She took another bite and told me not to change it. So I never did. That is what stayed with me in the end. Not the closing room. Not my mother pearls. Not the buyer portfolio snapping shut. Not my brother panic. What stayed was a woman at her own kitchen table tasting cake in a patch of afternoon sun, and recognizing her life in the shape of sweetness even after so much else had gone dim. A person's worth does not expire when memory does. And sometimes the quietest person in the family is the only one still keeping watch when everyone else starts calculating. So if you are listening to this, and there is an older person in your life whose papers you keep meaning to ask about, then ask. If there is a grandmother or father or aunt or neighbor being pushed to sign things they do not fully understand, then pay attention now. Not later. Now. Because the people who exploit the vulnerable count on silence and delay more than anything else. If this story moved you, then like this video and subscribe. Comment below with the one object or room or memory you would defend if the people around you suddenly forgot what love is supposed to look like. And share this with someone who needs the reminder that dignity still matters even when a person grows forgetful. Especially then. I kept the table. I kept the house. And in the end I think what I really kept was the proof that my grandmother saw the truth before any of us had the courage to name it.